Yeah. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to Jesse and Nils. So,
Thank you. Good morning, all. Welcome. Thank you for joining this panel discussion on how surveillance think. Our goal is to have a lively and provocative discussion about surveillance in the modern age, kind of how we got here, what it looks like today, and where we're going. I'm going to take just a brief moment to let folks introduce themselves, and then we're going to dive into a conversation. Our goal is to be as kind of chatty as we possibly can about what's happening in the world of surveillance, and then do that for about 30 minutes or so, and then definitely want to open it up for questions and conversation. If you have burning questions that we can get to while we're talking, you can throw your hand up, and Nils and I, as the facilitators here, will try to get to you. But if we wait till the end of the 30 minutes, just because we're engaged up front, that might happen as well. So let me just say a couple words about myself. I'm a partner at the consulting firm Deloitte. I work primarily with government clients and have been operating and kind of playing in the let's call it the surveillance and data space for about 10 years now across different types of agencies. I also work with corporate clients and have discovered over that time period that there's actually a lot of similar interests between the government space and the corporate space, and that will be much of what we're going to be talking about today. Let me just, we're going to kind of cruise around the arc here in our little coffee chat. And Ejovi, if you're kind enough to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ejovi. I've had a long career in computer security. I started when I was 15. Became an OpenBSD developer, which is known as one of the more secure operating systems. I was part of a group called Louie, which is a security research group, where actually most of our member success has actually come from outside of security. We had a member sell WhatsApp. He was a member, Jan. Founders of Napsters were also members. A lot of the members started as white hat hackers or gray hat hackers. Did security consulting for a long time, both in finance and software auditing. And most recently, I think relevant to this discussion, started a software incubator in Seattle that deals with personal data.
I'm Vivek, Wadhwa. I research about advancing technologies, I write about them, and get into a lot of controversies.
Cool. So I'm Pete Warden. I'm a surveillant. I'm actually analyzing hundreds of millions of Instagram photos to try and figure out what we can find out about places and people.
Pete, I just tweeted their photo. So
awesome. I'm going to be...
They're being ID'd by the government right now. Right.
Well, I'm looking for hipsters, so if any of you have moustaches, you'll show up on the...
Right.
And in a past life, I've also been a journalist covering a lot of security stuff.
So his software can do to you what I just said, which is ID you and tell your friends and relatives where you are, tell the NSA and God knows which other agency.
I'm Gilman Louie. I'm with Alsop Louie Partners. I'm a venture capitalist. We put a lot of activities around information security, privacy, big data analytics. Prior to being a partner and founder of that fund, I was the original CEO of InQtel, which is the venture arm of the intelligence community. Also serve on the board of the Markle Foundation, which wrote the original papers on information technology and the role of privacy in government and national security. I'm also chairman of the Federation of American Scientists, and pretty interested in this category.
My name is Nils Gilman. I'm the executive director of the Social Science Matrix here at Berkeley. I've worked in software companies and in the consulting space around many of these issues for many years. Let me just start by thinking back to a year ago. I think it was almost a year ago to the day that the Snowden story broke. And I remember my initial reaction to it was, Snowden thinks he's going to be taking down the intelligence community in the United States, but the people who are really going to suffer are going to be the software companies that are doing things that are at least cognate to things that are happening inside the intelligence community. And increasingly, there's been a rising drumbeat of conversations of exactly this sort. And I'm just thinking about articles that appeared this week, ranging from the New York Times that says in the surveillance debate, White House is turning its focus to Silicon Valley. Basically, the White House is saying, well, they're doing it too. Why aren't you guys complaining about them? Or to take another example, the American Conservative magazine, just to show you that this is a bipartisan issue, has an article saying the same thing, basically, and observing that all of these do not track standards that have been put out in the last couple of years are basically losing subscribers constantly. Yahoo pulled out. Google seems a little bit iffy on the whole thing. So increasingly, there's a convergence. There's an awareness that there's a convergence in terms of both the technology and in terms of the ambitions that many of the companies and the governments have in these spaces. And what we were hoping to do in this panel is talk to people who've been involved on both sides of this debate about this convergence, how we got here, and so on. So maybe I can just begin by asking a question to all of you about what the sort of turning points were. And maybe we can just start by talking about 9/11 as kind of a key moment where the sort of perception of what was normatively acceptable in the surveillance space really began to change.
Sure, I'll start off because I was there. My office overlooked the Pentagon, and I was the head of In-Q-Tel at the time. And I remember that day pretty well on all the things that transpired afterwards. If you put yourself in the context of a national security executive officer, federal employee, everybody was aware of why CIA got established in the first place. And the whole idea was, 1947, a bunch of people kind of looked back at 1941 and said, we kind of had all the data necessary to determine that attack was imminent on Pearl Harbor, even down to the last minute. But we couldn't figure out how to put all those pieces together, so we're going to solve this problem using an institutional structure by centralizing all the information and create a new organization, new agency called the CIA. Okay, fast forward, 1999, one of the reasons why they established In-Q-Tel was they had this huge fear that once again they had all this data now scattered around a dozen different agencies and living in all these information silos, and nobody could put all the information together. And everybody felt at that time, it was kind of interesting, that an attack was imminent. We didn't know where, but we knew that the drumbeat of threats were on the rise. So the day after 9/11, of course, everybody then goes in, looks at all the data, do the forensics analysis and said, yeah, we had all the data necessary to determine that attack was imminent, right? Down to, if we pulled the bench warrants from the first World Trade Center attacks, it pointed to individuals who shared the same frequent flyer numbers, the same phone numbers, the same addresses, common overlaps, 19 to 22 people that actually perpetuated the attack using aircraft on the second attack. So immediately the mindset was, we're never going to have that happen again. And the solution, quite frankly, was let's turn to technology principally being developed by consumer companies out in Silicon Valley to apply it against our problem set. So companies like Palantir got created. Things that we take for granted today, like Google Earth, well, that was, having all that data geospatially was a big deal back then. When we made the investment, so did the Google. So we had to understand the mindset that led us to the capability, so we built all these tools. My only comment is the tools probably far exceeded the capacity of policymakers to keep up with appropriate policies and appropriate uses of those tools.
Was there a similar turning point on the corporate side? So the government had its moment where it realized, we need to be gathering data and processing data and gathering insights from data in a way that we previously have never done before. What about on the corporate side?
So I would say that people looked at Google and saw they were making a hell of a lot of money and said, we want to do that too. I talk about, we talk about big data, we talk about data science, but there's a massive, Google has been a massive leader there, and a lot of what we're doing has been sort of like driven by seeing how much money they've been able to make with basically a pure data product. So from my point of view, that's, that
dollars.
was the moment. Yeah,
it's dollars.
It was like, oh my God, they're making loads of money. There were a bunch of college kids with an algorithm and loads of data. How can we do that?
Yep.
I want to say I was working for Lehman Brothers, and I was outside of the World Trade Center when that incident happened. I think when we think about 9/11, there was a lot of consumer buy-in to surveillance at that moment. But consumers believed that the surveillance applies to foreign terrorists. right? And when you look at big data and surveillance, it's actually very difficult to differentiate beforehand who's a foreign terrorist and who's a domestic, just normal individual. And so I think, in short term, it's like, yeah, we need more surveillance because we could have identified this. But if you think about it on a bigger scale, it's actually, at that moment, we were buying into domestic surveillance as well. You can't have one without the other. I think the Snowden incident basically reminded people of that fact.
I think it's nothing to do with 9/11 or Snowden. We're chasing a red herring over here. What's been happening is that over the last 50, 60 years, computing has been growing exponentially. So this device over here is more powerful than the create two supercomputer was. It sits in our pocket waiting for us to check email. At the same time, you have advances in sensor technologies. Sensors as in cameras, motion detectors, GPSs, gyroscopes, you name it. These sensors have dropped exponentially in price, exponentially in footprint. The sensors in this iPhone here would have cost at least $500,000 about 30, 40 years ago. So those have gotten smaller. The problem is that our laws, our ethics, our values have been growing linearly while technology is growing exponentially. We haven't been able to keep pace with them. So technology is racing ahead, advancing at light speed, and making all sorts of things possible. And the people are clueless. They don't even realize that technology has advanced that rapidly. They don't realize that this is a massive surveillance device that Big Brother would have dreamed about. This Big Brother couldn't have imagined giving human beings a device that would keep track of everywhere they went, when they woke up, when they slept, what they were who they were talking to, what their thoughts were, what they wanted to search. Big Brother couldn't have dreamed of getting this type of information. Yet we pay for this. We pay hundreds of dollars to buy it, and then hundreds of dollars to stay connected. Yeah, exactly. So we do this voluntarily, willingly. This was unimaginable even 15 years ago.
So let's look at the positive case for this, though. I want to kind of twist it in a different direction. I think we normally talk about this. So undoubtedly, that's true. What's the positive case for surveillance? And we can do it on the government side or the corporate side or kind of smack dab in the middle, but why should we, what is the argument for needing technologies like this? Why and how are we better off?
I got to say that I opt into surveillance on the corporate side because of convenience, right? If I allow Google or Amazon to monitor my activities, that experience when I'm shopping on Amazon, when I'm searching on Google, is going to be much better. Government surveillance doesn't give that immediate response, right? It doesn't give that immediate benefit, and so I only assume the worst, right? I think that's the big challenge.
But there haven't been any 9/11, so you should be grateful that we have the freedoms we have right now. It's because of government surveillance that we can live the lifestyle that we do right now.
Well, it's kind of an interesting position to be in right now because we opt into those devices. We even pay for those devices because A, they're convenient. To my kids, they're fun, right? Great source of entertainment. If you ever had to travel more than 3 hours in a car, right? Instantly you're tossing your iPads and phones back in the back of the car just for a peace of mind, right? And then the third area, quite frankly, is decision advantage. If I can make a decision a millisecond faster than you can make a decision, I win the trade, right? So I'm happy, and it turns out that most people are happy to give away their information. But what we're lacking is a model where people can actually control that flow of information. So now we're stuck with this kind of busted model of do I share, which means give 100% control of this piece of information leaving my phone, or I don't share it, I get zero value, and I don't have access to the net.
So do we need to, people happily give away their personal information for the sake of convenience. Whole business models in the Silicon Valley are based on that. Is it possible to imagine that there's a different model out there? You're suggesting it's a broken model, but what would be a model that wouldn't be broken?
Well, I would say, and of course it's just one framework, but one framework to think about is I want to have a tether to every piece of information that's about me, because any data about me is a digital representation of me. It's like a fractal. It's a piece of me that's floating out in the ether, right? And at any point in time, I want to be able to say, you know what? I deny you access to that piece of information. I want it back because it's mine. It's about me, right? I did not give my information to Google. Google should not own my data. I'm giving them a license to use my data in exchange for free services. But that that's kind of a new way of thinking about the problem. So it's not about privacy, it's really about, in my view, control. And if I can get more control and use new technologies to get better control, that's going to kind of help a lot of these problems, both on the government side as well as in the consumer side.
Even about property, right? I mean, it's the idea that your data broadly defined is your property, and you should be able to license it using your terms to whoever you want.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, I have to jump in there because I think that's a completely wrong-headed solution. No, I mean, the key problem is we're approaching this as a technical problem. Like the fact that I am here at DataEDGE, who owns that fact? And how do you track that? How do you even tag that? I mean,
I think you just signed away your rights, by the way.
Yes.
And you're being recorded right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So the security camera had you on the way in.
Yeah.
The machine.
And lots of people with Instagram photos too. So what we've had for years, for decades, we've had Axiom, we've had all of these people who actually keep all of this really detailed information about us. And what we've done is we've had a social solution where if people start misusing that, if people start abusing how the information is being used, and I see this in the Snowden stuff as well, like we actually have social mechanisms which are very unsatisfying if you're an engineer, if you're a technical guy, because you want to design better machines to fix this. But what we need is better journalists, we need better informed lawyers, we need better informed politicians. So just like you were saying.
We need social consensus on what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
There's no way we can develop it fast enough because technology is racing ahead before we do. You know, the next battle, we talk about our privacy. We've given away all our information already. It's too late. Ray Kurzweil is busy trying to re-engineer the human brain so he can recompose us from all the information that they've already gathered. So the past, it's too late. Okay, it's going to be used forever against us. Now, today, DNA sequencing. So far, we've become information. Now we're becoming data. That what makes us up, our body, our genome, is getting in the public domain. And there's no way of stopping. I can take a strand of your hair and resequence you. So that means that we've now deciphered exactly your physical composition. We're giving that away. In the future, we're going to have robots serving us at home. We're going to have Rosie-like robots within a decade, 15 years from now. Those robots are going to be connected to each other. They're going to be watching everything we do from childhood, from the time they look after your babies, to the time you go to the bathroom. Everywhere you're going to have sensors, you're going to have robots everywhere. So we're going to be surveyed not only by the current agencies, by everyone, everything in the future, and the entire universe around us.
Yeah, but we have lots of models out there already that works pretty well. Not great, but pretty well. I mean,
But the cat is out of the bag. Once you've had your genome sequence, it's in the public domain.
Let me give you an example.
Right.
Credit scores, right? That's a system that works pretty well. In the old days, somebody could put a black mark on your credit rating. You had no control. You had no idea who these credit agencies were, and they had no responsibility of sharing that information with you. Well, people basically said, that's a bad idea, because people were being redlined and blacklisted, and based on what one company says, determine your whole livelihood going forward.
But that still happens, though. It happens by employers who go and look at your social media profiles, who are now running the same analytics to decide whether to hire you or not.
I'm just saying, as a framework, that
we
society...
We think that we have security. We do not have security. We don't know who is using that information for what purposes. The cat is out of the bag.
I think policy, it's a fantasy if we think that we can develop some policy that will protect our data, because when we think about the internet, it is an international platform, and we can't police every country in the world, right? And once our data is out there. It doesn't come back. We can't monitor it. We can't police it. It's done, right? It's gone. The problem, I think, is that there's two concepts of data, right? There's the data that I cognitively give you, and it's the data that you passively observe from me. And the scary part is the data that you passively observe from me that identifies things that I don't want to share with you. And there's no policy that I've seen that will protect this data on an international level.
So I think it was 15 years ago, Scott McNealy said, privacy is dead, get over it. And people sort of haven't gotten over it yet. We're still having this conversation.
But they don't know that it's dead, though. That's the problem, is they don't know how much they're being surveyed.
Yeah, a lot of people making a lot of money off of it. So the only one who was wrong was Scott, because he went out of business.
How do you think we talked about 9/11. I want to pose this to Vivek. You have this nice image of technology changing at an exponential rate and morals and ethics changing at a linear rate. What do you think the trajectory of that moral change and the ethical or normative set of changes around these issues is likely to be in the same way that you projected out 10 years?
It's unpredictable because things really are moving that fast. I gave you the example of DNA sequencing. People really don't understand how dangerous that is. The fact that you can now start re-engineering people based on the information that you gathered in the past and based on their physical composition. We could start cloning people before we know it. This all seems like science fiction. That science fiction is happening in our lifetimes. So we are not ready for the future we're getting into.
It's interesting. I lived in Japan for the last 7 years, and they have an interesting take on policy. If a company leaks your data or is hacked, you get fined. The company gets fined $5 to $25 per individual that was leaked. And it's not a perfect solution, but what you see is that a company like Yahoo will start enforcing policies into every vendor that works with them. Because in reality, any vendor that has access to Yahoo's data has access to all of your data. And I think the biggest challenge now is, and we see this on the corporate level as well as the government. If Google has your data, everyone that interacts or sees Google's data transfer across the wire or has access to it also has access to your private information. And there's no way to police the companies that have access to Google's data or that are monitoring.
Yeah, but we have to, again, another imperfect system. But here we got lawyers. We have things like the PATH lawsuit and class action lawsuits coming out of Texas for people who grossly misuse that data. And it's not $25 a person. It's more like $2,500 a person per
So you look
incident.
at your company in China or Tanzania or God knows where the laws might be weaker and you get away with it.
Right. And the problem now, because of all these kind of various different laws and jurisdictions, is the big danger, and this is something that we were just talking about in Washington, is if the world marches down this data balkanization model, right, where everybody has different sets of rules, where your data has to stay in this country, but not in that country. It needs to be masked and anonymized over here, and over here you can do whatever you want. Unless at a global level, nation states at some level have some level of norm behaviors, we could easily find ourselves into a very bad information systems. Either totally scary, as in anybody can do anything they want and go after you directly, to a world in which no data flows and all of the advantages of knowledge and information get stuffed up in these, kind of make-believe mythical wall gardens. It could go ugly in either direction.
So all of us, I think, or almost all of us, have kind of worked across government and corporate data and surveillance. I wonder if we could just individually talk a little bit about how these entities are learning from each other in the world of surveillance, because I feel like the debates are often on one side or the other. We're either talking about using data for the sake of understanding customers or using data for the sake of identifying terrorists. But in fact, the kind of fundamental science behind both of those problems is quite similar. And I wonder if you either have stories or sort of insights about how those two entities are working together or learning from each other.
Palantir is probably one of the best examples, right? Palantir was, Peter Thiel came to me and said, I got this guy named Alex Karp, and a set of algorithms from PayPal. And these set of algorithms is used to decide at a very quickly whether or not somebody should be allowed to use their credit card or not across PayPal. And the reason why that was such a big important deal was PayPal at one point was losing more money in fraud than they had in profits in a particular year. So they worked on that to create a set of algorithms, and then they said, we think post 9/11 these algorithms could be very useful. We're not quite sure how, but we can imagine a world where we could use these algorithms to fight terrorism. So In-Q-Tel did the deal with Peter, and none of the other VCs even knew what Peter was talking about, right? But they all wanted to be nice to Peter because Peter also did rocket ships and cars and that kind of stuff. So they would call me up and say, please do a deal with Peter so that we can maintain the relationship. So we did the deal. We took that team and we put it into a three-letter agency to work on terrorism. They spent 2 years developing a model. It was much more than just link analysis. A really sophisticated data model and how to go after bad guys. Okay. Fast forward to, that was 2005. Fast forward to today, Palantir's biggest drivers in their business is financial services. That company is now worth $9 billion. That was the last market cap on this company, $9 billion. They any piece of property in Palo Alto that Google or Apple doesn't own is owned by Palantir, right? So what they did was they realized that this problem wasn't just a terrorist problem. This problem could solve all sorts of other commercial problems. And the financial services industry said, I want that. So it's really interesting. Started in the financial services, went to solve a government problem, went back to financial services in a much more profoundly different way than it originated in the original concept.
I think one of the challenges we've been facing in the company in Seattle is understanding intellectually and realistically that any algorithm you develop to identify someone is, you're not only developing for your company, but you're developing for every government in the world, right? Because effectively, any government in the world is going to have access to that. Any data that you gather about an individual is now accessible by any other entity, nation state in the world. And so you have to be comfortable with that. And so one of the challenges that we had in starting from the very beginning, and my partner is also someone with a long history in computer security, and one of the things we sat down and thought about was, how do we develop this system in a way that if, as American citizens, if we were put in a room and said, give up data, we wouldn't be able to do it. And it's a really, really hard thing to solve. You can't, it's really hard to say, I'm going to build a system that monitors people in a way that I can selectively decide, oh, I don't have the power to decide who else will be able to monitor them. And I think now, as entrepreneurs starting a business, especially a business in the data sciences space where you're monetizing individuals, this is something that you should be thinking about, but most people don't think about, right? And as a security person, I thought about it and I realized this is really hard, and I don't think other people are thinking about it.
Well, one of the examples that I actually have is not about the US government, but we're able to identify gay bars in Tehran. We don't want to. And we actually really do not want, there's a lot of, Moscow as well, there's a lot of really sensitive things that people in these other countries are putting out on social media, on completely public social media, that it doesn't take much algorithmic savvy to figure out some very damaging things. So, for ourselves, we're trying to avoid doing that when we can spot it. But what happens when people come from universities in those countries and are assigned to do that sort of stuff? If we can at least make people aware, get journalists talking about it, get just that social norms a little, if we can just push them a bit faster, at least they won't be so far behind that these horrible things will happen quite so often.
I mean, it raises the fascinating point of if you're in business, you have to learn how to think like a spy. Because if you're not thinking that way about how you're using the data or the way in which other people could be using your data, you're going to get surprised, right? I mean, which Ejovi is kind of...
It's actually happening the other way. Government is learning from private enterprise Absolutely. How to use that data. The spies are learning how to think like entrepreneurs are right now.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's decades in the work, right? We've got more to go,
Thanks to this guy.
You're right. It's absolutely right. It's the reason of, how do you get bureaucracies to be entrepreneurial?
Right.
And the challenge, though, when you have bureaucracies is entrepreneurs and bureaucracies with the power of bureaucracies are a lot different than an entrepreneur with a lot of money, right? And they can't be viewed as the same. And sometimes they're confused.
So one simplistic view that you sometimes hear about why we should be worried, fuck the NSA, but I want my free Gmail, is that, it's fine if Google wants to surveil me or whatever because they're just going to give me free Gmail and they're going to give me better ads so that they're not as wasteful. But that the government's going to be coming with, or the government could be coming with, guns and handcuffs in the middle of the night. And that probably is a realistic scenario in some of the countries you were just mentioning. But is that something that we actually have to worry about in our country?
Yeah, I would trust the NSA with my data more than I trust Google. Because I know what the NSA's intent is. I don't know what Google's intent is.
I don't know about that. I live in the communities. I'm kind of this weird beast.
Because you make money from Google. You make money from these companies.
I'm weird, right? Right now, I do
that's the problem here in Silicon Valley, that you've got this you've got this bubble here. You've got the venture capitalists who are defending
but I'm also a gubby.
the companies that they're making money from.
But I'm also a gubby.
Right.
So I'm also a Govy. So I'm in the weird world. It's like the Animal House. You have the angel on one side and the devil on the other side, and they're all talking.
But which one is which?
Yeah.
Which one's Well,
I can't tell the difference.
Let me put on my privacy and social responsibility hat here. The reason why, and I get this comment all the time, why are everybody paranoid about us? We're here, all of us in the government side is here to protect the country. We're trying to prevent the next bad thing from happening. And when I said this, that's absolutely true. There's none of us in this room are trying to make things bad for Americans. But we got to be very careful. I mean, we don't have a really great track record in the government, right? Every time there's a bad event that happens, some minority group in America suffers. World War II, Japanese Americans, right? This country marched in, took away their homes, and threw them in internment camps. During the 60s, during the civil rights movement, we were bugging civil rights leaders, right? We had to create all new laws in the 70s to reform the intelligence community by saying you can't spy on students on campuses. So, fast forward, 9/11, right? What took place in New York, profiling Arab Americans. So I try to explain to national security leaders, look, we're all trying to do the right thing, but you got to understand the context here. We are all powerful. What we do, we can take your livelihood away. And so we have to be very careful when we use these tools. Nobody's arguing whether or not we should have these tools, right? We do not want to not be able to read somebody else's email. That would be a really bad thing when the balloon goes up and the next big attack happens. The flip side of that is, if we're going to have these tools, we better be really confident on when we use it, how we use it, and be able to explain to people when they find out we are using this stuff.
Here's the scary thing.
One last comment from Ejovi here, and then we're going to open up for questions, and we'll break.
Data retention, right? And from a security standpoint, is a very challenging problem because when you think about data retention and security, it is impossible to defend against an unknown future attack, right? So how do you structure your data? How do you store data or keep data in a way that will prevent someone from abusing it 5 years in the future? It's impossible. And the scary thing is, if you think about government data retention and the civil rights abuses. Now, civil rights is the abuses in civil rights were fairly targeted. There was communities, but when you think about data retention and you're looking at a large data set and you want to identify some commonalities among that data set for prosecution, then with one sort of swipe, you can identify tens of millions of Americans, right?
And it's private enterprises doing that. I often say that entrepreneurs can do what only big governments could do before. Well, guess what? They can do the evil that he talked about today. Entrepreneurs can do it. Google can do it.
But they can't put you in prison.
Investing in can do it, and they do it. Any app developer can get onto my iPhone and start hacking in and getting all the other information from this phone, turn the microphone on, turn the camera on. God knows what they're doing when they're doing it. There aren't enough protections in this. Android is 100 times worse than this. Anyone can do it.
I want to open up for questions. We have 5 minutes. 5 or 10 minutes?
I have a question.
Yeah. Anna.
Yeah. So I sat in this room about a month ago, and there was a panel, a very interesting discussion among lawyers. Oh, sorry.
I want to make sure that we capture all the data.
Yeah.
Clearly for
rewind.
voice to
I
text
sat in this room about a month ago, and there were people, lawyers, scholars, technologists, a guy from Palantir, and we were talking about what the government can do. So it's not, the government has sort of been here but absent. There's a lot of conversation. John Podesta was here, Nicole Long, who's this head of privacy. They just issued a report on privacy, and I understand that it doesn't address the international issues and that each country is doing it differently. But I'd love to hear that there are things going on to address this, and I think there are really smart, interesting people in the country really trying to craft policies around privacy and how to do it. And so I liked the issue about should we have a tether, but I'm wondering if you have other thoughts about what are the right ways for us to constructively use the government, because the government can actually step in. I know there was a company that made a flashlight app that was sucking in everybody's data, and they got shut down. There are things the FTC can do that the public sector actually is very powerful if it wants to be. So I'm curious.
I know we need another amendment to the Constitution which says that human beings own their own data. That's how fundamental it is. That if you have that one law or that one rule, that constitutional right, then everything falls around it. We don't have any such protections right now.
Yeah, there's a lot more subtle things going on in the dialogue about.
But everything happens from that. The question is who owns his data? Who owns my DNA? Who owns the information that I gather over here?
Well, I'd like to hear if the panel. I think there are some more subtle ways to think about governing this, and I'd love to hear if people have thoughts about that.
But yeah, there is a federal agency at the most senior levels, either in the general counsel's office or in the executive branch or in the legislative branch, where this topic is not hotly discussed. I mean, I was at Stanford yesterday, teaching a class at Stanford, that other school on the other side of the border. and my last question after my class on government venture capital was, okay, I got a problem for you to solve. If you were handed the problem of what agency, whether it be a U.S. government agency, an independent agency, a nonprofit, what would you put as the primary control point of responsibility on cybersecurity, right? And it was a really interesting discussion. We said, okay, the problem with the NSA is they're really good technically, right? But it's really hard to defend networks as if your other part of the mission is to break into them, right? The FBI, great intelligence capability, right? Domestic intelligence capabilities, but they're also law enforcement. So when they find something that breaks the law, even if it's outside of the thing that they were supposed to be, protecting from an intelligence gathering points, do you trust them to be able to draw that line, right? So we went down through every one of these agencies. They all had a fundamental problem. And it was rather interesting. I said my proposed potential solution was the FCC. Why would the FCC be a good place to discuss some of these issues? Well, it's a quality of service issue, right? Cybersecurity, bad cybersecurity basically means the quality of service is poor. You can't trust the network, right? And then you apply the privacy issues as how do we look at privacy from a government point of view? And we can't look at it from a nation state point of view. I think that's the mistake. The rest of the world, for better or worse, turns to the US for some forms of leadership, particularly technology leadership. So we had to think globally. Well, no country in the world is going to say, we're going to stop spying. Nobody. Look, we understand that that's just part of playing the game. Okay, but there's a bunch of other stuff that happens that nobody wants to happen because this is bad for every rational player on the globe. So what are those set of social norms that at least we can get some level of agreement, like the way we had laws on protecting the high seas about piracy, that we can agree to, right? Can we come up with some certain rules that says, here's how we can respect each other's data, each other's citizens' data, but in a way that can be universally, at a minimum, expected quality level that everybody can expect to put the information across the wire.
Great. Question, yeah, right over here.
I don't know quite how to put this, but it seems to me that part of the problem is we live in a society that's dominated by science and technology and economic behavior. And they're both those practices are kind of teleological. They're just about further gathering more information and finding better sources of action. And the regulation is largely around action, things you're not allowed to act on. But now we're drifting into areas where even the gathering of information is something maybe you don't want to do. And are there times, is there any historical example of people deciding not to know something?
No. There's no historical precedent.
So it's totally new turf.
It's completely new turf, no historical precedent. Never before has humanity been connected. Never before have we been able to gather this much information. We used to have land records. We used to have deeds. We used to have very basic elementary information. Then we had phone books. And then we had other aggregators like we talked about before. But now exponential. We don't even know how much information we have now.
Well, the church was a great example, right? The church said, back in Galileo's time, all this science stuff was dangerous.
Right. I mean,
Right, so we burn people at the stake for doing science. So,
I mean,
so there were times in historic, there's been historical
So now we burn a bunch of
examples,
capitalists at the stake for doing investments.
to be historical about it, I mean, I think Gilman's point is exactly right. I mean, the Enlightenment as a project was an anti-church project, and it's, the slogan of the Enlightenment was "Dare to know."
Yeah, that was to know more.
Right, to always know more. And I would say
We're
since
running in the other direction.
well, but
So
the
if we
point is,
burn
since
all the VCs to the stake, will we stop progress?
I think one of the, I mean, we're thinking about the concept of a corporate enterprise gathering data about an individual or another company. But there are a lot of other cases. For example, I think Florida is one of the states where arrest records are public. And you can data mine that. Companies have been data mining that and then pitting those arrest records online and then charging people to remove it, right? And so the biggest challenge, I think, is, again, not knowing what the future attack is going to be. And so if you don't know, you don't know what you're protecting against. And so Florida could be an attack vector, or Google can be an attack vector.
I mean, I think the other way to reframe the question that you just articulated is, what exactly are you trying to know about? So no one, even the US government, is going to spend billions and billions of dollars to know everything about everything, though
Right.
I'm sure there's some people who might want that.
So you're going to regulate intention?
Well, so not necessarily regulating intention, but the fundamental question is, like, let's just take it from the standpoint of the intelligence community. As citizens of the US government, do you want your intelligence community to know everything about every country on the planet, or do you want to make choices that we know a ton about 10 countries in the world, and we know a little bit about another 50 countries, and then there's a whole bunch of other countries that we really don't care about until for some reason they pop up on the radar. And
But what's going to happen is computers will gather all that data. Computers will do the
But
analysis.
even if
It's not
computers,
about us
but even
anymore.
if
We're going
computers
to have
gather the data, you
AI-based
still have.
computers
But even
that
if, hang on
similar.
one second.
Right.
Even if computers gather the data, someone still has to make sense of it, and it
No,
costs
computers will
money.
make sense of it.
Maybe at some
AIs will
point.
make sense of it and give us information
Let's
when we need it.
take one more question, and then we'll break. All the way in the back.
I already have the mic.
Where's the mic? Sorry.
have the
Go for it. That's our last question. I didn't realize the mic had
steal it from
gone
me
in
and
advance of my fingers.
That's what I call power.
So it seems like in these discussions, something that's very popular for people to say is that we own our own data, and that we should have some sort of rule that, or some sort of law or constitutional amendment that we own our own data. But that fundamentally just makes no sense to me. So I guess my question is, when we talk about owning our own data, is it the kind of ownership where, because I own my own data, I can perform transactions with it? Like, I can give it to you in exchange for an application, which in fact is how things work right now in the App Store. When I install LinkedIn, I say, oh, I own my own data, and I'm going to give LinkedIn all of my data. Or is it like this Lockean sort of political philosophy thing where it's inalienable? Literally, I cannot give away my data. I own it so much that I can't give it away. I just don't understand what we mean, because I own my own data, but I give it away every day.
So on a high level, think of it, we have a term in government called personally identified information, PII. The mental models that people are beginning to think about because of the Snowden issue is, do we treat it like intellectual property, right? Because there are a set of rules on how we have to, when people use intellectual property, when you modify intellectual property, when you add on to it, who's allowed to use it, how do you monetize it, right? So there are these kind of mental frameworks. Now, are any of these models executable today? The answer is no, in the practical sense. But they could be, right? I mean, just as the same systems that we use to track and predict, we could use systems to track and render some level of limited control on PII information. So it's just, the thing that will drive that is, quite frankly, people making money. Now, you think about companies like Wickr and Snapchat and WhatsApp. 3 years ago, 4 years ago, people would say there is no value to privacy. You cannot make any, this is the worst part of the security industry you could be, is in the privacy part, because there's no money to be made. And if you're a chief privacy officer, you are the least respected person in the building. Right? And now, because there's billions of dollars associated with these companies, every venture capitalist is trying to find the next new privacy thing to fund. And it's kind of crazy in terms of the reality versus the promise. But there is a market right now. Will it last, or is it a bubble? I don't know. But this week, I had one of my companies marked up from $15 million to $100 million in 6 weeks, and nothing really changed in the company.
I think the concept of we own our data is ridiculous as well. I think when I step outside and I drive my car, my data is now part of the commons, right? My license plate data there's no way I can even know that that data is being accumulated on me, right? So I think
That's why we need the right to own our own data. So
perhaps, yeah, but I think a better solution. I think a better solution is data retention, right? We can tell companies how long they can retain our data, not necessarily what they can do with it or when they can gather it, but we can dictate how long they can hold it. But for governments, we should assume that they're always going to hold it, right? And that's just the reality. But for a company, and I think the government abuse.
The good guys, not the bad guys.
Right. I think
bad guys are who I worry about.
Well, you never know who the bad guy is going to be, right? So the abuse is going to be when I give my data to a corporate entity, I take that data back, but somehow a government entity gets that data and uses it against me. That's one fear. And so I think that retention policies will go a long way towards protecting my kids in the future from the mistakes they make on Facebook today.
And I would jump in. I mean, I think the fundamental problem that I see is when I talk to people, they don't care about owning their data. They care about bad things and abuses happening at the endpoint. Like that's like just, I've tried to sort of get across a lot of privacy stuff to people, and until I can boil it down to a concrete example of something bad that will happen to them, they just kind of look glassy-eyed and wander off.
But it worked on a do not call list at one level, right? I mean, this one little thing, your phone number, right? Everybody kept calling us and driving us crazy in the middle of the night. The phone kept on ringing. And so people finally said, well, we can create this do not call list, and if you violate these set of rules, then we will shut you down. The FTC will come after you. And you know what? My phone call level went way down. I still get a few, I'm doing really just a survey, really. But short of that, small group, it was effective on that one little thing. So there are models out there, whether or not long-term they'll work. I think data retention is a critical issue. That's why the EU's been pounding on it so hard, and Canadians. But we're a long ways off from solutions because the technology is not quite there yet, and the policy is 2 decades behind.
I think that's the right place to end. Please join me in thanking our panel for